first question I'd like to ask you that a lot of people have asked about is creative thinking a special gift or a skill which everyone can acquire?
One of the problems is the word creative covers too much. In other words, there's art, there's creative thinking and so on. In terms of creative thinking, it's a skill which everyone can acquire. Not everyone will be equally good, as with skiing or playing tennis or any other skill, but everyone can acquire a reasonable use of that skill. Yes.
And how do they do that?
By reading my books, by coming to my seminars, or by being taught by someone who knows my work.
Okay. All right. Does anyone else want to extend on that particular question just at the moment? Okay. My next... Yes? Sorry. Yes? The lady would like to know what, in your opinion, is the difference between creative art and creative thinking.
Well, let's put it this way. I don't claim to be an expert on art, on creative thinking, yes. So artists would say, yes, but you need this in addition. It's very interesting that of all the areas of art, the one which has shown most interest in my work is music. Music. And I'm not a musician at all. Music, because in music you start from nothing. In a painting, you may paint a portrait or landscape, and of course there's abstract art as well. But in music, you start from nothing. Eurythmics, on their best-selling album, have written Edward De Bono, thanks to Edward De Bono, Peter Gabriel, Pet Shop Boys. A lot of these groups have said that they use my work to generate their music. It's interesting to me because I would not have expected it.
Fascinating. So here's a question from one of the delegates. How does one break out of established patterns and allow new thoughts to establish new strategies?
Well, that's where the processes of provocation and so on, which I talked about the other day, come in. That if our usual thoughts are following the main track, and then there's ways of breaking out of it, challenge, provocation, random entry, all these are ways of getting away from the main track. And they can all be learnt, practiced, used, until you acquire some skill in them.
Can you give us an example of that?
Well, the example I gave the other day was talking to the ecology group in California, and they say we have a problem with factories on the river, they put out pollution, people downstream suffer. What can we do? So as a provocation, I said PO, which means provocation. PO, the factory should be downstream of itself. From that comes a very, very simple idea, which I'm told is now legislation in 13 countries, that if you build a factory on the river, your own input should be downstream of your own output. So you're the first to get your pollution, have to be concerned with cleaning it up. It's so obvious it could have been done 100 years ago.
Next question is, if mainstream primary and secondary education stifles creative thinking, how should schools change and adapt?
Well, with regard to school, I think we need to look at thinking in a very general sense. Creative thinking is part of it. Perceptual thinking perhaps is even more important. These processes can be taught in school very deliberately. In England, there's research showing that teaching my thinking as a separate subject improves performance in every other subject by between 30 and 100%. Geography, history, science, maths, everything. So these things can be done. They are being done, yes.
And do you think that some of the changes we've been hearing about throughout the conference about changing the way classrooms are set up and having mood lighting and beanbags for reading and so on are going to be a good thing? I
think those can help, but I think being very deliberate about learning thinking as a skill doesn't really depend on doing lots of fancy stuff. It doesn't. They're very deliberate, very formal processes the youngsters can use, and they choose it as their favorite subject when it's taught in school.
Does anyone... Sorry.
And I think I mentioned in Beijing, the University of Beijing has been doing research on my work in school for 9 years. Very positive results.
That's fantastic. Does anyone want to ask any questions to elaborate further on the education question? Any of you educationalists in the room? No? Okay, moving on to the next question. How does a person leading change stay on top of the game in leading the organisation in a meaningful and creative way?
Well, the key word in your question is meaningful. Many, many organisations talk about creativity. They pay lip service to creativity. because they find that much easier than actually doing anything about it. So they say we are creativity and creativity matters, and in the figures you showed, the survey of 1,500 CEOs put creativity top of the list. I'm sure they don't really do much in their own company because it's easy to talk about. What they need to do is be very structured, to appoint someone, a chief ideas officer, whose business it is to encourage creativity, to listen to ideas, and to follow through and see them put into action on something. But you need to be very formal about it. Just admonishing people or trying to motivate them is very weak.
So which companies out there have chief creative officers at the moment? Or something like that? Yeah? Does anyone want to talk about what difference that's making? Is that a new innovation for your company, or is that something you've always had? Who would like to talk about that? Would you like to? Lady here in the third row? Yep, okay. Pete, just hold on. There's a lady. Yeah.
Oh, no, it's just, sorry. Thank you. Eve Gugulis, Newcrest Mining. We have change and innovation at top of the agenda. Our executive, Andrew Logan, is in the room and certainly champions the cause. I wouldn't say it's easy, but I certainly think that we are moving in the right direction.
Okay, and so in a mining company, obviously, how long has that been going on for?
I might pass on to Andrew, 2 years.
Andrew, would you like to just talk about that? Because your program is very interesting.
I think, as Edward said, I'm not the title Edward's called, but it's very much that role description. So it's, I think it's having a change agent that, survives through all the hard bits of having to tighten the business in difficult environments and always create innovation thinking, but also have discussions. So I'm always having discussions with everyone in the organisation, independent of their role or status, and sometimes status impedes creative thinkers. So it's really many, many conversations and becoming a connector. So it's very much what I think Malcolm Gladwell talks about is you've got to find the mavens, the connectors and the salesmen, and often they're pigeonholed in the organisation.
That's great, thank you. And Peter, you had a question or a comment? Just a mic over here, please. Down here in the front row, please.
So, Edward, Peter Cronborg, I was speaking with the chairman of a major Australian company, very successful company, about innovation 2 years ago. Innovation.
Yeah.
And the chairman of the company said, innovation is not a board responsibility.
Is not?
Is not a board responsibility.
Innovation is not, but encouraging innovation is.
Could you give some examples of what a board can do to help innovation occur throughout a company?
It can appoint a chief ideas officer who must be pretty senior, very senior, and it must give resources to allow for training in creativity, and must provide access for people who have ideas to talk to people who can do something about them. So there's quite a lot that can be done quite formally.
Great. Okay, Edward, a lot of people in the room have talked about how you can move forward to develop a culture of innovation against very entrenched bureaucratic systems. Obviously, Chief Creative Ideas Officer will help, but if you can't appoint one in your own department, in your own section, how can you bring forward innovation and creativity?
Well, I think the first thing to do would be to focus on simplicity as the purpose of creativity. Because if you show a new product, a new idea which is complex, it's going to cost money, people are obviously rather scared about it. If you focus your creativity on simplicity and show that instead of doing this way, it can be done in a much simpler way, much cheaper way, people are much more willing to listen. And once you establish some base that your simplifying ideas work, people will be willing to listen to other ideas. So be very clear about the creative ideas you put forward. Simplicity is an ideal area. Instead of doing it this way, we could do it this way. I remember once there was 3 pages of computer programming. In the end, it could be done in 2 lines. That's simplifying. So simplicity is a very key area to provide creativity, in which to provide creativity.
Okay, I'm going to suggest that if a couple of you want to ask some questions of Edward quickly on this same theme, please could you stand up, come forward and ask your question now, because we have about 4 minutes left with Edward just now, and a great opportunity to ask your question about any barriers to creativity and innovation, either in your own personal or organisational or community situations. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask? Yes.
Hi, Edward. This semester at uni, I'm doing a Masters of Entrepreneurship and Innovation, and one of the same course actually that Tania did a few years ago. And we've been looking at creative thinking tools, and funnily enough, we've been looking both at some of your tools and some of Brendan Boyle's tools. And I had a bit of a debate with my lecturer as to whether or not Brendan's approach of going for really radical and very out there creative ideas first before you converge on some kind of elegant solution. For me anyway, I actually find that quite tricky because I like to just go straight for the elegant solution and that simplicity you just spoke of. Do you know if it's, in your experience, do you find it useful to just really practice out there ideas, radical ideas, or do you find that you just tend to go straight to an elegant solution in your creative process?
No, I think I would be very clear about the focus. What am I thinking of? What are the sort of values I want in the idea? Then I would use some of the techniques to generate some potential ideas. I would then focus on the best few and seek to develop them further. Quite deliberately, quite formally.
I've got a question.
Mic on Michael.
I've got a question. You have been working in the field for so long. Is there an early idea that you had that you have put to the side as perhaps not as much as had as much promise as you hoped? And what is the latest thinking? Or did you come to your discovery some time ago and it's just been crystallised? You know what I mean? The growth of your own thinking?
Mathematics and geometry have been around for 2,000 years and they're still valid. And similarly, ideas I had maybe 30 years ago are still valid, yes. So there may be new bits added, maybe slight modifications, but essentially the base is still the same, yes.
So you're not going to add a seventh hat? A seventh hat?
The?
Seventh hat.
Seventh hat, I've had various suggestions, none of them have been very convincing, but there's always a possibility of a seventh hat, yes.
What's in your next book?
The next book is on thinking to create value. Very specifically, thinking to create value. And just as we have a hypothesis in science, we have a value dream and that sort of thing. And there's different ways of doing it. You can work upwards from simple things changing slowly, or you can work backwards from big dreams and bring towards the practical. So thinking to create value. I invented a new word for it called bonting.
Bonting.
Bonting, which is related to bonus or bonum, which is good in Latin, and also to De Bono.
Ah, well, there's a new word to go and tweet, bonting.
Bonting.
Go bonting, everyone. Yes.
Hello, Edward. I read your Simplicity book many years back and thought it was lovely. And I was going to ask you if there's been any more examples of, say, a government. It's almost like starting with a fresh sheet of paper, if you like, or simplifying all the laws and the legal things, which end up being such a maze. It's gone so complex, it's just beyond a joke, I feel.
The problem is there's no natural process to simplicity. Things don't ever get simpler by themselves. Things get more and more complex. So you really need to make an effort to have a department of simplification or someone concerned with simplification. You really need to make a deliberate effort. It won't just happen.
You worked with the government on that at all?
Well, the government could set up a department of simplicity, yes. Simplify things, yes.
But when you've done your work with the Australian government, and you have done some work with the Australian government, have you attempted...
Not enough.
Not enough. We're sure of that.
I think all governments should have a minister for thinking, definitely. And in that department there should be a section on simplifying. Yes, everything. Could be anything. Could be marriage laws, could be anything.
Question over here.
I'm wondering if you've had any involvement of innovation in the mental health space, particularly because currently we're living in a society where we still hold people with mental illness in locked rooms, seclusion rooms, for up to a month. And obviously there's a lot of room for innovation. I'm wondering if you've got any examples yourself.
Well, people have reported back to me, I haven't done research directly, that, for instance, in schizophrenia, something like the 6 hats reduces confusion very considerably. And similarly, in the confusion of old age, 6 hats reduces confusion. And a lot of the tools where you know exactly what you're doing at any moment, that makes it easier in dementia and other things to move forward. So the answer is yes, I haven't deliberately focused on that area, but people have reported back to me that they've used them in these areas.
May I ask you, please, to give a warm round of applause to Dr Edward De Bono.